The year is 1962. The state of Israel is 14 years old. It is not a nation in a state of peace, but a nation in a state of intermission. The 1948 war drew lines on a map, but these lines were written in pencil, not ink. To the north lies the Syrian Arab Republic, and looming over the Sea of Galilee, the strategic high ground, the Golan Heights. From this plateau, Syrian artillery shells rain down on Israeli life. They target the kibbutzim, the collective farms of Hula and Dan and Gonan. They target fishermen on the Kinneret, Israel's primary source of fresh water. The shells are not just military actions. They are a form of psychological torture, a constant whining reminder that the nation's northern border is, in reality, the gun site of its neighbor. The Golan is a fortress, a 70-kilometer slab of volcanic rock, bristling with concrete bunkers, overlapping fields of fire, and the full-throated support of the Soviet Union. In Tel Aviv, in a nondescript office building, the Israeli intelligence community is facing a crisis of imagination. The old guard of Amman, the military intelligence directorate, is effective at tactical analysis, counting tanks, intercepting radio chatter. But this is a strategic problem. It is not enough to know how many guns are on the Golan. Israel needs to know where they are aimed, when they will fire, and, most importantly, what the men in Damascus are thinking. Enter Meir Amit, the new director of the Mossad. Amit is not a creature of the shadows, not a man forged in the quiet libraries of intelligence analysis. He is a soldier, a former general, a man of action who believes intelligence is useless if it is not operational. He sees the Mossad as a fractured, timid organization, still reeling from the failures of the 1950s. He has a new doctrine. He does not want to steal secrets. He wants to acquire them. He does not want agents who report on the enemy. He wants agents who can become the enemy. Amit's gaze is fixed on Damascus. The Syrian capital is a black box. The Ba'ath Party, a volatile mix of pan-Arab nationalism, socialism, and paranoia, is tearing the country apart in a constant cycle of coups and counter-coups. It is impossible to place an agent inside. The Mukhabarat, Syria's secret police, sees spies in every shadow. To send a Katsa, a field agent, into this environment is not a mission. It is a sacrifice. But Amit is convinced that the next war will not be won on the battlefield. It will be won in the months and years before. It will be won by an architect of deception, a ghost who can walk the halls of power in Damascus and rearrange the furniture without anyone noticing. He needs more than a spy. He needs a chameleon, a man so charismatic, so believable, that the Syrian elite will not just trust him, they will invite him in. He needs someone who can look a Syrian general in the eye, smile, and be offered the keys to the fortress. The problem is, such a man does not exist. The Mossad's recruiters scan their files. They look through the lists of demobilized soldiers, academics, and European Jewish émigrés. None fit the profile. They need a man who is not playing an Arab, but who is Arab, in his bones, his language, his culture. Then, a name is pulled from a dusty, rejected file. A man named Eliyahu ben Shaul Cohen, an Egyptian-born Jew, an accountant now working in a Tel Aviv office, checking invoices. He had been rejected by Mossad years earlier, deemed unsuitable. But Amit is desperate. He reads the file again, fluent in Arabic with a perfect Syrian-Egyptian accent, a photographic memory, a quiet, unassuming charisma, and most importantly, a simmering, deep-set desire to serve. Bring him in, Amit orders. The plan is not just to get intelligence. The plan is to build a legend so powerful it will warp the reality of the Syrian high command. The war will not begin with the scream of jets. It will begin with a knock on the door of a Tel Aviv apartment. Eli Cohen was a man living in gray. By 1960, he was married to Nadia, a beautiful Iraqi Jewish immigrant, and they had the beginnings of a family. He worked a 9-to-5 job. He was, by all accounts, mild, polite, and unremarkable. But beneath this placid surface was the restless energy of a man twice rejected by the very services he yearned to join. He was a patriot, fluent in 5 languages, who felt his talents were being wasted on spreadsheets. When the third invitation came, it was different. It was not a casual inquiry. It was a summons. He was brought to a safe house, where he met not a recruiter but a handler, the man who introduced himself as Yitzhak, was all business. "We are not offering you a job, Eli," Yitzhak said, his voice flat. "We are offering you a mission. If you accept, you will cease to be Eli Cohen. Your wife will become, in effect, a widow. Your children will grow up not knowing you. You will live a life of total, profound loneliness. And if you are caught, we will deny you exist." Eli's unsuitability from the past was now his greatest asset. He wasn't a gung-ho soldier. He was a careful, meticulous, and patient actor. He had the gray man quality, the ability to blend in, combined with a secret, powerful charisma he could deploy at will. He accepted. The next 6 months were a surgical deconstruction of one man and the fabrication of another. Eli Cohen was taken to Mossad's training facility. He was taught the minutiae of tradecraft, how to use a one-time pad, how to code and decode messages, how to spot a tail, the 7-hour stare, where you watch your own reflection in a shop window for hours, waiting for a face to repeat. He was taught to handle explosives, to fire a weapon. But the most intense training was psychological. He was placed in solitary confinement to test his resilience. He was subjected to mock interrogations, designed to break him, to find the seam between Eli Cohen and his new identity. The identity itself was a masterpiece of legend building. He would not be Eli Cohen. He would be Kamel Amin Thabet. Born in Beirut to Syrian parents, his family had moved to Alexandria, Egypt when he was a child. There, his family had built a modest textile business. After his parents' death, Kamel, grieving and ambitious, moved to Argentina in 1955 to seek his fortune. Every detail was crafted. Mossad agents in Cairo and Beirut created forged birth certificates, school records, and property deeds. Agents in Argentina created a paper trail for his import-export business. He was given a fictional family history, complete with photographs of ancestors, other Mossad agents, and anecdotes of a childhood that never happened. Eli Cohen, the man who loved his family and his country, was buried. In his place stood Kamel Amin Thabet, the suave, wealthy Syrian expatriate, a man whose only passions were money, women, and the glorious future of the Syrian Arab Republic. His final test was the Argentine doorway. It was too dangerous to insert him directly into Syria. He had to be seasoned. He had to arrive in Damascus not as a stranger, but as a celebrated patriot returning home. The proving ground would be Buenos Aires, the bustling, neutral key capital that swarmed with diplomats, refugees, Nazi fugitives, and Syrian expatriates. In 1961, Kamel Amin Thabet stepped off a plane in Argentina. He was no longer Eli, he was Kamel. He moved with a new confidence. He wore expensive European suits. He carried a fat roll of American dollars, supplied by Mossad's liaison department. His mission, to become the most prominent, most patriotic, and most generous Syrian businessman in South America. Buenos Aires in 1961 was a city of whispers and shadows. It was a place where identities were shed and new ones adopted. For Kamel Amin Thabet, it was a stage. He did not simply arrive. He emerged. He rented a lavish apartment in a prestigious district, his import-export business giving him the perfect cover for a steady, unexplained flow of cash. His strategy, briefed by his Mossad handlers, was one of overwhelming charisma. He began frequenting the places where the Syrian expatriate community gathered. The clubs Syrio-Libanese, the upscale cafes, and the mosques. He was the ideal socialite. He was handsome, witty, and, above all, generous. He picked up every tab. He hosted decadent parties that became the talk of the community. His apartment was stocked with the finest liquor, the best food, and the most beautiful women. But Kamel was not just a playboy. He was a patriot. In these gatherings, his voice was the loudest in its praise for the Ba'ath Party, the loudest in its condemnation of Israel. He spoke of his homeland with a manufactured nostalgia, a deep yearning to return and use his wealth to help build the new Syria. He was, in short, everything the revolutionary Syrian elite wanted to be: worldly, wealthy, modern, and fiercely nationalistic. His primary target was the Syrian embassy. He quickly befriended the embassy staff, becoming a regular at their private functions. He was the man who could get things: rare scotch, difficult to acquire import licenses. He made himself indispensable. His breakthrough came in the form of General Amin al-Hafiz, the Syrian military attaché in Buenos Aires. Hafiz was a key figure in the Ba'athist military committee, a future leader of Syria, and a man who appreciated the finer things in life. Kamel cultivated him relentlessly. They were seen together at horse races, at expensive restaurants. Kamel listened more than he spoke, absorbing Hafiz's political ambitions, his frustrations, and his weaknesses. To Hafiz, Kamel was a useful ally, a wealthy, well-connected patriot who could be a valuable source of funding and international connections for the Ba'ath Party. Kamel, in turn, used Hafiz to build his credentials. He never asked for secrets. He only offered friendship, loyalty, and money. The performance was flawless. Kamel became so embedded in the embassy's social fabric that he was given a tour of the embassy itself, including its secure communications room. He was trusted. He hosted a lavish farewell party for a Syrian general returning to Damascus, a party so extravagant that the general, deeply indebted, wrote him a stack of introductory letters. To my dear friends in the general staff, one read, "Kamel Amin Thabet is one of us. Treat him as you would treat me." After nearly 2 years of this meticulous stagecraft, the legend was complete. He was no longer Eli Cohen, the Tel Aviv accountant. He was Kamel Amin Thabet, the beloved son of the Syrian diaspora, the man who had conquered Buenos Aires and was now ready to come home. In late 1961, Kamel informed his friends that he was dissolving his business in Argentina. He was moving to Damascus. The news was met with celebration. He was not just moving to Damascus, he was being welcomed by it. He had letters of introduction from generals, diplomats, and business leaders. He had the personal blessing of Amin al-Hafiz. As he boarded the ship for Europe, his Mossad handler met him one last time in a Genoa safe house. The final pieces of tradecraft were handed over: a state-of-the-art radio transmitter, disguised within a piece of furniture, a camera small enough to hide in a cigarette lighter, and a list of dead-drop locations. "From now on, Kamel," the handler said, "you are alone. You are on the other side of the mirror." Kamel Amin Thabet arrived in Damascus in January 1962, disembarking as a returning hero. The deception was holding. The door to the lion's den had been opened, not by force, but by invitation. Damascus in 1962 was a city holding its breath. It was the nerve center of Ba'athist ideology, a place of revolutionary fervor, intense suspicion, and plots whispered in the smoke-filled cafes of the Al-Hamidiyya Souk. The Mukhabarat was the city's bloodstream, its agents present in every hotel lobby, every government office, every military barracks. It was the most dangerous city in the world for an Israeli agent. Kamel Amin Thabet entered it like a conquering prince. He did not slip in quietly. He arrived with fanfare, using the letters of introduction from Buenos Aires to secure meetings before his luggage was even unpacked. He presented himself to the Ministry of Economy, not as a job seeker, but as an investor. He was the wealthy expatriate, here to pour his fortune into the Syrian economy. He rented a luxurious, sprawling apartment in the upscale Abu Rumane district. It was a calculated choice. The neighborhood was home to high-ranking military officers, government ministers, and foreign embassies. It was the heart of the regime. His apartment, perfectly situated, was just across the street from the headquarters of the Syrian General Staff. From his balcony, he could see the comings and goings of the entire military leadership. Within weeks, his home became what it had been in Buenos Aires, the premier salon in Damascus. The parties were legendary. Generals, cabinet ministers, Ba'ath Party officials, and media personalities flocked to Kamel's apartment. Here, the scotch flowed freely, a luxury in socialist Syria. The food was European, and the conversation was unguarded. Kamel played his role to perfection. He was the ultimate facilitator. He never pried. He never asked a direct question about military matters. Instead, he listened. He was the sympathetic ear, the generous friend. Officers, their tongues loosened by alcohol and Kamel's charm, would complain about their postings, their equipment, their rivals. They would boast of new weapon systems arriving from the Soviets, of inspection tours, of brigade movements. A minister would complain about the cost of building new fortifications on the Golan. A general would brag about the new T-54 tanks. Camel, refilling their glasses, would absorb it all, his photographic memory cataloging every word. He was the third man, the neutral party in a city of bitter rivalries. When one general was plotting against another, both would often confide in Camel, seeking his objective, business-minded advice. He was seen as above the political fray, a man motivated only by patriotism and profit. This access was unprecedented, but it was not enough to just hear secrets. He had to see them. He used his import-export business as a pretext. He donated high-end furniture to government offices, which allowed him to enter ministries and map their layouts. He consulted on logistics, offering to use his international contacts to help the military import specialized equipment, a process that gave him access to procurement lists and technical specifications. He even cultivated a relationship with a high-ranking cleric, Sheikh Abdul Bari al-Tarabulsi, which gave him a veneer of piety and access to the religious establishment, another pillar of Syrian society. But the most audacious move was his friendship with the radio broadcaster George Saif. Saif was the voice of Radio Damascus, the regime's primary propaganda arm. Kamel became a frequent guest, introduced as a great Syrian patriot who has returned to build the homeland. He broadcast his analysis of world events, his speeches filled with fiery pan-Arab rhetoric. Through Saif, Kamel gained a press pass that gave him almost unrestricted access to government events. He was no longer just a socialite, he was a public figure, a trusted voice of the regime. He was hiding in plain sight, his deception so total that he had become a part of the very establishment he was sent to dismantle. The chameleon had not just blended in, he had become the color of the wall itself. In the quiet hours, long after the last general had staggered home from his party, the apartment in Abu Rumane transformed. The salon became a transmission station. Kamal Amin Thabet, the socialite, would vanish, replaced by Eli Cohen, the Katsa. His operational headquarters was a small, hidden room, a space he had soundproofed himself. Here, the tools of his real trade were kept, a small, powerful Morse code transmitter, disguised inside the base of a luxurious European-made desk, a miniature camera, and his code books. The work was methodical, perilous, and crushingly lonely. Each night, Eli would sit, translating the day's intelligence, the drunk whispers of generals, the technical specs from a procurement meeting, the troop movements he'd observed from his balcony, into a complex series of codes. He would then prepare the transmitter. This was the most dangerous part of the operation. The Mukhabarat, assisted by Soviet technicians, was constantly sweeping the Damascus airwaves for illegal transmissions. Their radio direction finding, RDF vans, known as hunter vans, roamed the city. A transmission lasting even a few minutes too long could be a death sentence. To mask the sound, Eli had a routine. He would play a record of loud, classical Arabic music. The staccato bursts of the Morse code, dit-dit-da-dit, would be lost in the crescendos of the Ode and the Kanun. He transmitted in short, precise bursts, usually in the early morning, when the city's radio traffic was at its lowest. His messages, received at a listening post in Tel Aviv, were pure gold. They were not just rumors. They were the regime's order of battle. 2 headquarters. From 88, Amin al-Hafiz confirmed promotion, head of military committee. 3 new MiG-21 squadrons arriving from Saratov. Delivery, 4 May, based at Meze Airfield. General Staff meeting, 10 Yuaners tomorrow. Topic, water diversion, Dan tributary. Request funds, new entertainment budget. Costs in Damascus rising. He supplemented the radio transmissions with sitzur, or dead drops. He would take rolls of microfilm, shot with his miniature camera, and hide them in pre-arranged locations. A hollowed-out stone in a public park, a specific book in a university library. But this was slow. The radio was his lifeline, his most valuable and most dangerous tool. The psychological pressure was immense. He was a man living 2 lives, separated by the thinnest of walls. He would spend his evenings laughing and drinking with men he knew he was betraying, men who would execute him without hesitation if they knew the truth. He sent coded letters to his wife, Nadia, through his Mossad handlers, letters that spoke of business trips and successful deals, but which she, also briefed, understood were a sign he was still alive. The close calls were frequent. One night, during a transmission, the power in his building fluctuated. His signal spiked, and he knew instinctively that he had been heard by a listening post. He immediately shut down, packed the transmitter, and spent the next 48 hours as the perfect socialite, hosting a party, his heart hammering in his chest, waiting for the knock on the door that, this time, did not come. Another time, a high-ranking mukhabarat officer, a guest at his party, idly pointed to the desk where the transmitter was hidden. "That is a beautiful piece, Camel." "German?" Eli smiled, pouring the man another drink. "Syrian craftsmanship, my friend, the finest. A gift from a businessman in Aleppo." The officer nodded, satisfied. Eli's pulse returned to normal. He was surviving on a cocktail of meticulous tradecraft, pure nerve, and the arrogance of his targets. They simply could not conceive that the man in their midst, the man who funded their pleasures, was the architect of their downfall. The music box played on, and Tel Aviv listened. Camel's influence was no longer just social, it was becoming structural. In February 1963, a violent coup ripped through Damascus. The Ba'ath Party seized total control of Syria. The political landscape was shattered, and in the chaos, new kings were crowned. Camel's most important contact from Buenos Aires, General Amin al-Hafiz, was recalled and soon became one of the most powerful men in the country, eventually rising to become president. This was the moment Eli's handlers had dreamed of. The Argentine doorway had not just led to a salon, it had led directly to the new seat of power. Kamel Amin Thabit was no longer just a wealthy businessman. He was a personal friend of the new head of state. His access was immediate and total. He was waved through checkpoints. He was invited to the exclusive Damascus Officers Club, the inner sanctum where the military elite drank, dined, and plotted the future of the nation. Here, the atmosphere was different from his parties. This was not social boasting. This was operational planning. Camel, the civilian patriot, was a welcome presence. The generals, many of whom were soldiers but not economists, sought his business advice. He became an unofficial consultant to the Ministry of Defense. "Camel," a general might say over a game of backgammon, "we are building a new set of bunkers in the south, but the concrete contracts are a mess. The suppliers are thieves." Camel would nod sympathetically, offering advice on logistics and suppliers. In the process, he would learn the exact location of the new bunker line, the thickness of the concrete, and the timeline for its completion. This information was transmitted to Tel Aviv by morning. He used his position to solve problems, which in turn gave him more access. When the army wanted to buy new communications equipment, Camel used his European contacts, Mossad, to source the best gear, undercutting other suppliers. He was given the technical specifications and frequencies for the entire Syrian military's radio network. But his greatest value was his proximity to the men themselves. He understood their personalities. He knew which general was ambitious, which was corrupt, which was competent, and which was a drunk. He provided Mossad with a psychological map of the Syrian High Command. To headquarters, from 88. General Hariri is insecure. Flatter him about his tanks. Colonel Jamil is deeply in debt from gambling. He is a recruitment target. Hafiz trusts no one except the old Buenos Aires circle. My position is secure. They are planning a major operation to divert the Jordan River headwaters. This is their highest priority. This last piece of intelligence was a seismic shock to Tel Aviv. The water war was escalating. Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon were attempting to divert the sources of the Jordan River, an action that would fatally cripple Israel's agriculture and water supply. It was a casus belli, a cause for war. Israel's response was military, precision strikes against the diversion equipment. But these strikes were only possible because of Kamel. He provided the exact coordinates of the heavy machinery, the guard schedules, and the patrol routes of the Syrian army units protecting the sites. When the Israeli jets appeared in the sky, hit their targets with impossible accuracy, and vanished, the Syrian general staff was baffled. They blamed poor security, then traitors, then faulty Soviet equipment. They never for a moment blamed the charming businessman sitting in their own canteen, shaking his head and lamenting the Zionist aggression. He was now operating at a level few spies in history have ever achieved. He was not just reporting on policy, he was influencing it. He had become one of them. The Golan Heights was Camel's obsession, just as it was Mossad's. The strategic plateau was a black zone. It was the most heavily militarized piece of land in the Middle East, a Syrian fortress in depth, designed by Soviet military engineers. It was a labyrinth of concrete bunkers, underground command centers, minefields, and pre-sighted artillery positions, all with a commanding view of northern Israel. For Amman, Israeli military intelligence, the Golan was a guessing game. They knew it was strong, but they didn't know how strong or where the key nodes were. Kamel, using his unparalleled access, proposed a solution. He told his friends in the general staff that he wanted to give back to the brave soldiers defending the homeland. He would use his own money to host a tour of the front lines, to entertain the troops, to boost morale. The generals were delighted. Who would deny such a patriot? Kamel Amin Thabet, accompanied by high-ranking Syrian officers, was given a full, unrestricted tour of the Golan Heights. It was a spy's fantasy. The commanders, eager to impress their wealthy benefactor, showed him everything. "This is our Kala line, Camel," one general boasted, pointing to a series of camouflaged fortifications. "From here, we can turn the Hula Valley into a sea of fire. The Zionists won't know what hit them." Camel, camera concealed, marveled at their ingenuity. He walked through the trenches. He was shown the entrances to the underground command bunkers. He noted the exact caliber of the artillery, the layout of the tank traps, the interlocking fields of fire. His photographic memory absorbed it all. But he also noticed a problem for the Syrians. The Golan was a harsh volcanic plateau. There was no shade. The sun was relentless. The concrete bunkers became ovens. The soldiers were miserable. And then, the moment of inspired deception. Standing on a ridge, looking down at a complex of perfectly hidden bunkers, Camel turned to the commanding general. "My friend," he said, his tone one of deep concern, "your men are true heroes, but they suffer in this sun, and your fortifications. They are brilliant, but they are so exposed. A clever Zionist pilot might spot the glare from the concrete." The general frowned. "What do you suggest, Camel? We cannot move the bunkers." Camel put his arm around the general's shoulder. "Something simple. Something for the men. Trees. Plant trees." The general was confused. "Trees?" "Eucalyptus," Camel said. "They grow fast. They provide excellent shade for the men. They will make the positions more comfortable. And," he added, "their roots will help stabilize the earth, and their leaves will provide natural camouflage, breaking up the silhouette of the bunkers from the air. It will make them invisible." It was a stroke of genius. It appealed to the general's ego, a clever camouflage idea, and his concern for his men's comfort. The general loved it. He ordered eucalyptus trees to be planted immediately, directly on top of or next to every single major bunker, command post, and artillery position on the Golan Heights. Camel even offered to help pay for the saplings. Within weeks, Tel Aviv received a new transmission from Agent 88. It was a complete, detailed map of the Golan Heights. It showed the three main fortified lines, the location of every bunker, every artillery piece, every minefield, and every command post. And it came with a final, devastating note. "All major targets will be marked for you by trees." The deception was complete. The impenetrable fortress of the Golan now had its own targeting beacons, planted by the Syrian army itself. The war, on this front, was over. It just hadn't been fought yet. By 1964, Kamel Amin Thabet was at the absolute zenith of his power. He was not just an insider, he was a kingmaker. His friend, Amin al-Hafiz, was president. His apartment was an unofficial office of the regime. His business was thriving, now functioning as a channel for discreet arms deals and foreign currency operations for the government. He had become so trusted, so integral to the fabric of the Damascus elite, that a stunning proposal was made. The Ba'ath Party offered Kamel Amin Thabet a position in the government. They wanted to nominate him as Deputy Minister of Defense. The news was sent to Tel Aviv via a coded burst. The Mossad headquarters was thrown into a state of shock and elation. Their agent, their man in Damascus, he was one step away from running the entire Syrian military. He would have the keys to the safe. He would know every plan, every secret, every weakness. But Meir Amit, the Mossad chief, hesitated. This was the ultimate penetration. It was also the ultimate trap. As a minister, Kamel would be under a new, suffocating level of scrutiny. He would have bodyguards. His communications would be monitored. His ability to transmit would be reduced to almost zero. He would be, in effect, a prisoner of his own success. More urgently, Amit recognized the symptoms of a system beginning to turn on itself. The Ba'athist regime, having consolidated power, was now descending into a fever of internal paranoia. The third man dynamic that Kamel had exploited, being the neutral friend to all factions, was becoming impossible. The factions were hardening. You were either with one side or the other. A new, dangerous figure had emerged from the shadows, Colonel Ahmed Swidani, the head of the Mukhabarat. Swidani was not like the other generals. He was not a drinker, not a socialite. He was a cold professional intelligence officer, deeply suspicious and fiercely competent. He did not trust the charismatic, wealthy expatriate who had appeared from nowhere and befriended the entire high command. Swidani began his own quiet investigation into Kamel Amin Thabet. He started by looking at the leaks. For 2 years, the Syrian military had been plagued by uncanny failures. Israeli jets knew exactly where to strike. Israeli artillery knew exactly where to fire. Diplomatic initiatives were preempted. There was a mole, a jasus, spy at the highest level. Swidani's gaze fell on the man who had access to all the generals, the man who visited the Golan, the man who consulted for the Ministry of Defense, Kamel Amin Thabet. At the same time, Eli himself was beginning to show signs of strain. The psychological burden was catching up to him. He had been Kamel for almost 4 years. He missed his wife, Nadia, and his children. He had taken a brief vacation to Europe to meet his handler and, in a tearful secret reunion, his wife. He had promised her it would be his last trip. He wanted to come home. But Mossad, blinded by the prize of the deputy minister position, pushed him to go back. Just for a few more months. The intelligence was too valuable. War was coming, and Eli was their only eyes. Reluctantly, Eli agreed. He returned to Damascus in late 1964, but the city had changed. The atmosphere was no longer welcoming. It was tense. The parties were smaller, the conversations more guarded. And Colonel Swidani was watching. Kamel was now caught between his Mossad handlers, who were demanding more and more intelligence on the imminent war and the tightening net of the Mukhabarat. He was the third man in a game that was running out of time. The hunt was on. Colonel Swidani, convinced the leak was electronic, appealed to the Soviet Union for help. The USSR, invested heavily in its Syrian client state, was furious about the security breaches. They dispatched a team of their best signals intelligence, SIGINT, technicians, and a fleet of brand-new, top-of-the-line RDF Hunter vans. These were not the clumsy detection units of the past. These were sophisticated instruments, capable of triangulating a radio signal with pinpoint accuracy in minutes. Swidani's plan was simple and brutal. He would force the spy into the open. In January 1965, a citywide radio silence was imposed on Damascus. All non-military and non-diplomatic transmissions were banned. The city's power grid was systematically shut down, sector by sector, forcing any illegal transmitter to use its own power source, creating a signal that was easier to isolate. The Hunter vans began their slow, methodical sweep of the capital. Eli knew immediately that the game was changing. His Mossad handlers sent him an urgent coded message: "Cease transmission. Go dark. Await extraction." But Eli was facing an impossible choice. The intelligence he now possessed was the most critical of his career. The Syrian and Egyptian high commands were finalizing Operation Conqueror, a joint plan for a full-scale invasion of Israel. He had the operational details, the timelines, the order of battle. This was not just a war plan, it was the war plan. To go silent now would be to blind Israel at the most critical moment. He was also, perhaps, a victim of his own success. After 4 years of outsmarting the entire Syrian regime, a dangerous thread of hubris had woven itself into his caution. He believed he was smarter than them. He believed he was untouchable. He made a fatal decision. He would transmit. He would send the invasion plans, an act of defiance against his handler's orders, driven by his own sense of duty. He waited for a day when a severe storm lashed Damascus, hoping the atmospheric disturbance would mask his signal. He set up his transmitter, not in his usual spot, but in a different part of his apartment. He began to send the long, complex message. In a mobile command post, a Soviet technician saw a flicker on his screen. A non-standard, high-speed Morse transmission. "Got him," he muttered in Russian. The vans, which had been sweeping the Abu Rumaneh district for days, suddenly had their quarry. They moved in from 3 directions, the operators watching their signal strength meters jump. "The signal is strong," one operator reported to Swidani. "It's coming from the apartment building on the corner." Swidani knew the building. It was the building of the Patriot, Kamil Amin Thabet, the building directly across from the General Staff headquarters. "Seal the block," Swidani ordered, his voice cold. "All units, move in." Eli, his fingers flying across the Morse key, was nearing the end of his message. He was sending the final confirmation of the Syrian 12th Armored Brigade's position. He did not hear the vehicles pulling up in the street below. He did not hear the muffled sounds of boots in the stairwell. He was so focused on the transmission, on the static in his ears, that he missed the silence that preceded the storm. The end came not with a gunshot, but with the splintering of wood. It was just after 5 p.m. on January 18, 1965. Eli was deep in his transmission. The message was long, and he had broken his own rule. He had stayed on the air for well over an hour. The Mukhabarat team, led by Swidani himself, did not knock. They used a battering ram on the heavy oak door of his apartment. The sound was like a thunderclap. Eli's head snapped up. His blood ran cold. He knew in that microsecond that it was over. His first instinct was tradecraft. He had to destroy the evidence. He grabbed his code book and a half-finished message and threw them into a small basin of acid he kept for just this purpose. The door burst open. Syrian commandos, heavily armed, flooded the apartment. Swidani was right behind them. They found Eli not in his living room, but in the bedroom, frantically trying to destroy his papers. "Kamil Amin Thabet," Swidani barked. The commandos seized him, slamming him against the wall. Swidani walked calmly into the room. His eyes swept over the scene, the overturned chair, the basin of smoking acid, and, on the desk, the radio transmitter, still warm to the touch. They dragged Eli, struggling, into the living room. The mask of Kamil, the suave, confident businessman, was gone. This was Eli Cohen, the Mossad Katza, trapped and cornered. "What is this, Kamil?" Swidani asked, gesturing to the radio equipment his men were already dismantling. "More business from Argentina?" Eli said nothing. His mind was racing, not for escape, but for damage control. What had he sent? What was left? Had the core message about the invasion plan gotten through? Swidani's men were tearing the apartment apart. They found the cameras hidden in lamps, the microfilm in hollowed-out books, the spare antenna taped behind a wardrobe. They found his forged passports. The evidence was total and irrefutable. The generals, Eli's friends, were summoned to the apartment in the pre-dawn darkness. They arrived, half-dressed and confused, to find their benefactor in handcuffs, surrounded by security. When Swidani showed them the transmitter, their faces turned from confusion to horror, and then to a deep, personal shame. They, the leaders of Syria, had been deceived. They had been made fools of by this one man. Their rage was palpable. Amin al-Hafiz, the president, was the last to arrive. He stared at Eli, the man he had brought from Buenos Aires, the man he had trusted as a brother. "Why?" Hafiz reportedly whispered, his voice choked with disbelief. Eli Cohen, his face bruised, looked his former friend in the eye and said nothing. The deception was over. He was dragged from the apartment, a hood thrown over his head. As he was pushed down the stairs, he knew he would never see Tel Aviv again. He knew the fate of spies who were caught. But as the truck doors slammed shut, one thought gave him a dark, cold comfort. The maps were sent, the trees were planted, and the war was already won. For Eli Cohen, the world shrank to the size of a concrete cell in the Mukhabarat's al-Mezzeh prison. The full brutal weight of the Syrian state fell upon him. The man who had been the toast of Damascus was now its most hated prisoner. His interrogation was relentless. It was overseen by Swidani, but also by the furious generals he had betrayed. They did not just want information, they wanted retribution. They wanted to know how deep the penetration went. Who else was involved? Eli was subjected to weeks of agonizing torture. Yet, by all accounts, he showed unimaginable courage. He confirmed his identity. He was Eliyahu ben Shaul Cohen, an officer of the Mossad. He gave them his name, rank, and serial number. He insisted to the end that he had acted entirely alone. He refused to give up the names of his contacts, his handlers, or any other Mossad asset in the country. He protected the few low-level Syrians who had unwittingly helped him. His friends in the high command, he made clear, were not traitors. They were fools, victims of his charm and their own arrogance. This perhaps was his final, sharpest revenge. In Tel Aviv, the silence from Agent 88 was deafening. When Radio Damascus finally announced the capture of a master spy, the Mossad was plunged into mourning. Mir Amit, the man who had sent him, took it as a profound personal failure. Israel launched a frantic, desperate international campaign to save him. They appealed to the Pope, to the leaders of France, Belgium, and Canada. They offered to exchange a dozen Syrian prisoners. They offered millions of dollars. The world's media became obsessed with the case of the spy who fooled Syria. But the Syrian regime, humiliated before the world, craved a public execution. Amin al-Hafiz, his own reputation in tatters, could not afford to show mercy. Eli Cohen was put on trial. It was a military tribunal, broadcast on state television. It was pure political theater. A gaunt, broken Eli was dragged before the cameras as the prosecutor detailed his crimes. He was sentenced to death. In his final days, he was allowed to write one last letter to his wife, Nadia.
My dear Nadia, I am writing to you these last words. I beg you not to mourn for what has passed, but to look to the future. Take care of yourself and our children. Pray for my soul. I am sending you a last kiss. On May 18, 1965, just after 3 a.m., Eli Cohen was taken from his cell. He was dressed in a simple white robe. He was allowed a final meeting with the aged chief rabbi of Damascus. He was then marched into Marjeh Square, Martyrs Square, in the center of Damascus.
A crowd of thousands, assembled for the spectacle, watched in silence. He was led up to a gallows, erected in the square. A military officer read the charges and the sentence. Eli Cohen, Agent 88, was hanged. His body was left to hang in the square for 6 hours, a brutal warning to all. A sign was placed on his chest, detailing his identity and his crimes. The Syrian government refused, and continues to refuse, to return his body. His widow, Nadia, would spend the rest of her life campaigning for his return, for a grave she could visit. In Tel Aviv, the Mossad grieved. But as the intelligence community analyzed the sheer volume and quality of the information Eli had sent over 4 years, a cold, strategic realization set in. His sacrifice had not been in vain. He had given them everything. He had provided a perfect, high-definition photograph of the enemy's mind, his fortress, and his intentions. The chair in Damascus was empty, but the planning rooms in Tel Aviv were full, and they had the blueprint for a victory. 2 years pass. The tension Eli Cohen had reported finally snaps. On June 5, 1967, at 7:45 a.m., the war before it began finally, officially, begins. But it is not a war, it is a reckoning. The first move is Operation Focus. The Israeli Air Force, in a stunning, preemptive strike, attacks the Egyptian Air Force on the ground. But this is not just an Egyptian operation. Simultaneously, Israeli jets scream towards Syria. The Syrian pilots at the Mezzeh airfield, the same one Camel had watched from his balcony, scramble to their MiG-21s. But it is too late. The Israeli pilots do not have to search for their targets. They have Camel's maps, they have the schedules, they know the frequencies. They destroy the Syrian Air Force on the tarmac. With air supremacy achieved in a matter of hours, the battle turns to the ground. Egypt, Jordan, and Syria launch their assault. The most dangerous front, The one that has haunted Israel for 2 decades is the Golan Heights. The Syrian High Command, secure in their fortress, unleash a massive artillery barrage on the kibbutzim below, just as they had always done. But this time, Israel is ready to end the threat. The IDF's Northern Command, under General David Elazar, prepares to assault the impenetrable heights. The Israeli pilots given the task of softening the bunkers are not flying blind. They are not searching for targets. They are looking for trees. The eucalyptus trees that Camel Amin Thabit had convinced the Syrian army to plant are now, 2 years later, mature. They stand out starkly against the brown volcanic rock of the Golan. They are a perfect green X, marking every single major Syrian position. The Israeli jets dive. They bypass the decoy positions and the fake trenches. They drop their ordnance directly onto the hidden command bunkers, the concealed artillery nests. Everywhere, a eucalyptus tree provides shade. The Syrian fortifications, built to withstand a frontal assault, are shattered from above. When the Israeli tanks and Golani Brigade infantry begin their uphill charge, they are met not by a coordinated, furious defense, but by a military that has been decapitated. The Syrian commanders are dead, their communication lines cut, their bunkers collapsed. The soldiers, leaderless and terrified, break and flee. The Golan Heights, a fortress that military analysts predicted would take weeks and cost thousands of lives to capture, falls to the IDF in less than 2 days. Israeli soldiers advancing across the plateau are stunned. They find the bunkers, smoke rising from their entrances, with the telltale eucalyptus trees standing guard. The victory is total. In 6 days, Israel has defeated 3 Arab armies, redrawn the map of the Middle East, and secured its existence. But the victory was not won in those 6 days. It was won in 1964 in an apartment in Damascus. It was won by a man who convinced his enemy to mark their own graves. It was won by a man who bought his country its future with his life. Eli Cohen's echo is the silence on the Golan. The deception was not just a collection of secrets. It was a strategic masterpiece, an act of psychological warfare so profound that the enemy never even knew the battle had been fought. This is how Mossad deceived Damascus. This is how they won the war, long before the first shot was ever fired. Thank you for joining this special investigation. If you believe these stories must be told, please subscribe to Cinematic Intel and share this report. Your vigilance is our mission.